So now, on behalf of the Business Council of Westchester, it is my distinct honor, along with my chair, Tony Justick, to present you with the Global Leadership Laureate Award for your work in defending universal values and pushing the frontiers of human rights around the globe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you know, I feel exactly the same way about all of you. I am truly touched and delighted to be here this evening. I want to thank Marcia and Tony and the entire board, the staff and the membership of the Business Council for this recognition, which really does mean a great deal to me personally. I want to acknowledge the elected officials. I want to thank outgoing County Executive Rob Astorino for his service to our county. Thank you, Rob. And I want to welcome George Latimer, who will be taking the reins of the county executive position. You know, Westchester is such a unique place. Bill and I have loved living here. We really enjoy being part of the life of the county, being involved in not-for-profit, charitable activities. And it's wonderful to see so many friends here, people who have done a great deal over the years to make Westchester County a great place to live and work. I was talking to my husband on the way here. He called me from Puerto Rico, where he has spent the day trying to help with the recovery effort there. And he told me that having met with the governor and various mayors and the elected representative of Congress, he was walking on the streets of San Juan, and all of a sudden he started hearing yells, "Hey, hey, President Clinton." He turned around, there were a bunch of Con Ed workers. And he went over to greet them, and they said, we take care of your house. And thankfully, finally, Puerto Rico got rid of that ridiculous contract they signed and actually relied upon the Mutual Assistance Pact that utilities have to help places that have been devastated by natural disasters. And, you know, people turning on the lights in San Juan are right from here in Westchester. And it was just such a perfect story. I said, "Oh, Bill, I'm on my way to a dinner. I'm going to tell everybody there," because it's exactly the kind of experience that we have living here. I also want to say a special thank you to Rick Swerat for his years of work on behalf of Westchester residents with autism, Down syndrome, and other disabilities. As Marcia said, it was the greatest honor of my public life to be the senator from New York for 8 years and to work with many people here and to really help to kick off the not-for-profit summit that we used to hold on an annual basis here in this ballroom. To recognize that a community is empowered and enriched by its not-for-profit and charitable sector, along with its private and public sector. And Marcia was telling me tonight that the Business Council has long recognized that. The not-for-profit sector employs a lot of people. I mean, it is part of the fabric of Westchester, both in terms of the services that it provides, but also in terms of the jobs that it provides. So the fact that the Business Council has recognized that is just another indicator of your understanding of how we grow an economy and meet the needs of people. You know, I also highly respect the work that the Business Council has done over a number of years on job training and job placement, and now your emphasis on the urban cores of the cities and towns here in the county is something that is also beginning to pay dividends. Marcia mentioned the book that I wrote, What Happened. A few people have copies of that here. And I have to tell you, I have been traveling around the country, and indeed a little bit around the world, talking about it. And I start off by saying, I used to feel in the past like I had to be careful in public and keep my guard up. Well, those days are over. And in What Happened, what I try to do is pull the curtain back on one of the wildest elections in American history. And I don't mean the race for Westchester County Executive. I talk about some of the moments that still frustrate me, including a chapter called Those Damn Emails. And I talk about some of the moments that I will remember forever. One of my favorites was campaigning across New York State, as I had done in the past, running for the Senate, this time for the primary. I'm still really proud of the campaign we ran and the 65.8 million Americans, but who's counting, who supported it. And writing the book was admittedly a somewhat painful process. I too am a fan of Golda Meir and have read about her and read some of her own writings. And it is always challenging when you're in a public position to try to share with readers or listeners what it is you went through and how it felt to you. But ultimately, for me, writing at our home in Chappaqua day after day, it was cathartic and reinvigorating. So when people ask me now, as they often do, when I'm walking in the woods in one of our great preserved spaces here in the county, and I thank everybody for those, because I've been to a lot of them, or shopping, or doing anything else in the course of the day. When people ask me, well, how are you? I say, well, as a person, I'm okay. But as an American, I'm concerned. And I'm concerned for a number of reasons. Look, our future is so positive. I am really ultimately optimistic and confident. And you heard a little bit of the reason why on a scale of the Business Council when you heard from Tony and Marcia. There is so much we can do together, but it requires us working together. It requires us shelving our partisan and ideological views in order to sit around a table and try to find common ground, and then to base decisions on evidence, reason, and facts in order to get outcomes that will benefit the most number of people. I want to just briefly mention 4 quick lessons that I try to impart in the book, because it's certainly about what happened, but it's also about what can happen or what will happen. It is about the future as well. First, everyone gets knocked down. I mean, that kind of goes with life. What matters is whether you get back up and keep going. And since Election Day, one of the most common questions people have asked me is, how did you get out of bed? And I'll admit, there were times when I did want to just pull the covers over my head. But thanks to my family, my friends, my faith, my interest in walking in the woods, my whole idea about how one tries to keep going in the face of real disappointment was obviously informed by so many of my friends and acquaintances who face real loss. They face losses that are devastating, losses of loved ones, loss of health, loss of jobs, despair and desperation. That's part of what we're facing with this opioid epidemic, and Tony told me that the Business Council Foundation will focus on that. People have to be given a sense of purpose, and I really appreciate so much knowing that those of you in this room get up with a purpose and get up with the goal in mind of trying to make what you do the best it can be. Now, I also did some yoga, and I practiced alternate nostril breathing, which I describe in the book. I actually was doing one interview, and the interviewer said, well, can you show that to us? I said, I don't think so. I'm not that loose. I'll wait. Yeah, and I had my fair share of Chardonnay. I've admitted that. I also started a new organization called Onward Together. I am hung up on this idea that we have to work together. I will just tell you that I feel so strongly about this. That doesn't mean we have to agree, and it also does mean that compromise is not a dirty word. You sometimes have to give a little in order to work with people who have different points of view. That's what our founders anticipated. That's what we have done over the years to get better and move toward a more perfect union. So I'm going to keep working on behalf of issues, causes, candidates that I care about. I'm not going to be on the sidelines because there's just too much at stake for New Yorkers and Americans. Like the fact that it's been 2 months since the Congress let the Children's Health Insurance Program expire. This program provides health care for 9 million kids. And it's something that I helped to start at the end of the 90s, and it was totally bipartisan. I worked with Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch and others who understood there was a real problem because kids from families that didn't have employer-based health insurance or who had chronic or traumatic conditions that busted through their lifetime limits, there was no insurance. And they were above the cutoff point for Medicaid. I'll tell you a quick story, because when I was working on health care back in 93 and 94, I traveled around the country and I listened to a lot of people, particularly a lot of patients and family members. And I'll never forget being in Cleveland at the Children's Hospital there, meeting with parents of kids who had serious health problems. And those are the people who just really just tore at my heart. And one man, and I bet someone very similar to people in this room, he said to me, I'm a really successful businessman. I've started my own business. I've worked hard my entire life. I have 2 daughters with cystic fibrosis. He said, I've told insurers that I would pay, I can pay, I want to pay, just to be able to get some relief from the costs, just a little bit. And everybody says no. This was back when pre-existing conditions were the end. I asked that man, well, so what do people tell you when you go and say you're successful, you're well off, you have money, you want to take care of your kids? He said, well, the last person I talked to said, well, you don't understand. We don't insure burning houses. And then this man, this very successful, dignified man with literally tears in his eyes said they called my little girls burning houses. So having seen and heard that, having visited children's hospitals across America, I said, we've got to do something for these families. And it was totally bipartisan. My husband signed it, George W. Bush, and the Republican Congresses under him reauthorized it. Barack Obama signed it, Republican Congresses reauthorized it. And now it's going to die at the end of this year. 9 million kids and their families are going to be told, sorry, that program, which was a federal-state partnership, is just not going to continue. I am just heartsick over this. I'm also really very disturbed about the tax reform, so-called reform bill that is being rushed through the Congress. I'm concerned about it for many reasons, one of which is it takes direct aim at counties like Westchester. This tax plan manages to hurt so many people, and it really does bother me. So rushing through a tax plan that manages to bust open the deficit while targeting families in states like New York who already pay more in taxes for the services that we get seems just so fundamentally wrong. Only about 25% of Americans, according to every poll, supports this because they're concerned it is going to hurt Medicare, Medicaid, it's going to hurt education, it's going to hurt a lot of individual Americans and end up actually raising taxes on a majority of Americans. Now, this would be maybe justifiable if we thought that it would actually produce the economic growth that is promised. But even just last week, we saw an example of how unlikely this is. You know, Gary Cohn, some of you may know from former life at Goldman Sachs, was sitting on a stage and taking part in a conversation about it. And the moderator turned to the audience and he asked the executives who were there, how many would use a tax cut to make investments in the workforce? And not many hands went up. And Gary, I think, was surprised. And the CEOs were basically saying, look, it's not a sure thing at all. So like many of you, I know that we've got to do things that will strengthen our economy, that will not bust our budget, destroy the future for our kids and our grandkids, and benefit a very, very few Americans. So there's a lot to be worried about, but I hope that through the combined efforts and voices of people like those in this room, we can speak up and speak out about what's at stake going forward and come to some balanced decisions about what's in our best interests. You know, Westchester is the most educated county in the United States, has the highest education level in the United States. It's quite remarkable. Over 47% of the people over the age of 25 have a bachelor's degree or higher, which makes sense when you see that we're home to some of the best schools, hospitals, research centers in the world. And I've seen what a difference those kinds of investments can make in economic growth. And I hope that we can look at what works and do more of that. The second quick lesson is one that has a lot of personal meaning to me. It's why I wrote a chapter in the book called On Being a Woman in Politics. The only way to get sexism out of politics is to get more women into politics. And that is slowly happening. We're beginning to see that. And it's not only true in politics, it's obviously true in business, the media, every walk of life. And there's a lot of research on this. When men become more successful, their professional success and likability go hand in hand. In other words, the more successful a man is, the more people like him. But with women, it's the exact opposite. The more professionally successful we are, according to the research, and I think there's some personal experience to back this up, the less people like us. And some of you in this room may have an inkling about what I'm talking about. The other interesting finding over both politics, business, and everything else is that women are seen favorably when we advocate for others, but unfavorably when we advocate for ourselves. And it is, it's proven time and time again. If you advocate for somebody else to get a raise or a promotion, you're really seen as a great team player. If you advocate for yourself, unlike a man who advocates for himself, you may end up creating an unfavorable image of yourself. Now, that has some personal resonance to me because, when I'm in a supporting position, like First Lady or Senator, representing all of you, or Secretary of State, working for the President, I have really high approval ratings. But then when I say, okay, now I'd like a chance to lead, it begins to change. And I can't think of a single woman who doesn't have some stories like that, and it's why I'm trying to help raise the debate about this so that more people understand. Yes, it can be infuriating, but it's also really rewarding because if you're at the table, you can make a contribution and you can have your voice heard and you can speak up on something that you really care about. Now, I've been inspired by the women and girls that I've been meeting out on the trail, and here I had a great book signing in Chappaqua a few weeks ago. They come in pantsuits, they come in Wonder Woman costumes. 4 and 6 and 8 and 10-year-olds, and it's thrilling because they're really, filled with lots of energy. And then young women, college and older, say, "I'm going to run for office someday," and I say, "I hope you will." And there's a lot of groups that can try to help you do that, and I hope that you will sign up and that more people who think about it will be willing to compete in the arena. Now, the third lesson that I want to quickly mention is this. The forces that were at work in the 2016 election are still with us. It was a perfect storm, deep currents of anger and resentment flowing through our culture, a political press that was having a hard time figuring out how to cover what was important, the unprecedented intervention at the end by the director of the FBI, and the information warfare waged from within the Kremlin. Now, what we've learned about Russian interference should worry everybody, because it's more than alarming. It's a clear and present danger to Western democracy. It's right out of Putin's playbook. We know that Russian agents used Facebook and Twitter, Google, YouTube, even Pinterest, to place targeted attack ads and negative stories, intended not only to hurt me, but maybe even more importantly, to fan the flames of division within our society. The Russians posed as Americans, pretending to be gun rights activists or Black Lives Matter activists. They even held phony demonstrations. And the propaganda was aimed directly at undecided voters or soft voters who might be persuaded by this information warfare. So the book and what happened is not just the past. It continues to happen right now. The Russians are still playing on anything they can to try to turn Americans against each other. This is bigger than one candidate, one election, even one country. And we have to do more to confront it. It is a threat to our national security, and I really hope the Congress, regardless of party, continues to investigate it. I hope that somehow there's an agreement within our country that we've got to protect our elections, that we can't place Putin's word over that of veteran intelligence officers, experts in our own country who found widespread evidence of Russian interference. It really is concerning to me because there is no doubt in my mind that having succeeded, they're not going to just go home. They're going to keep trying to get better. I negotiated with Putin. Part of the reason he was so against me is I negotiated with Putin. I understand what his objectives are. He really does want to do anything he can to disrupt Western democracy. He would like to see the end of the European Union and NATO. He would like to create even more partisan divisiveness within the United States. Our president, whoever our president is, takes an oath to faithfully execute the law and defend our Constitution. And we all have to demand that. No foreign power in history has attacked the United States with so few consequences. And that puts us at continuing risk. Finally, the fourth lesson is one close to my heart. There is no such thing as an alternative fact. And none of you could run a successful business or not for profit or even the Business Council just wishing reality would do what you want it to do. You take it and you work with it and you based your decisions on the evidence. How did we end up where we are? Well, our natural defenses have kind of been worn down over time. People have gotten used to confusing fact and fiction. We desperately need to expect our leaders to tell us the truth, our press to tell us the truth. That is what is required in a democracy, an informed citizenry. So it's not just frustrating, it is subversive to our democracy. So where do we go from here? Well, I certainly don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of confidence in the common sense of Americans. And I really believe that we are going to get through this together. We're going to understand what's at stake and stand up to protect our elections and our democracy and to get back to evidence-based decision-making. And being here in Westchester County, where that's just expected, makes me even more confident, because a lot of the change that will happen in America going forward will come from communities up, will come from people working together across the lines that too often divide us, will give us all a chance to start listening to each other again. So I come to you tonight with great hope and optimism and, yes, confidence that America's best days are ahead of us. We have to make up our minds to make it so. Thank you all very much.